To understand the roots of this crisis, we need to understand Cuba's history. For decades, the island nation has been under the rule of the Castro regime, which established a socialist system after the Cuban Revolution in 1959. While Cuba has made strides in healthcare and education, it's also faced severe economic challenges exacerbated by the collapse of the Soviet Union and decades of US economic sanctions.
The fact that this is a communist regime that was put into power by the Soviets in the 1930s. If we were to read this book called The Soviet Caribeño, which draws up Czech Republic documents, intelligence documents, documenting that Fidel Castro was chosen by the Soviets. Right? The Cuban people never chose Fidel Castro. And so this was a regime implemented by the Soviets to the Cuban people, and the Cuban exile community, the mass exodus, has been our key forms of expressing how we are not happy with this political system. We are against this totalitarian regime, and the political prisoners, the dissidents, the mass exodus. 500,000 Cubans fled Cuba since 2021. That is the largest exodus since when I arrived in the 1980s as a refugee. And we had 250,000 during the Mariel boat lift. And even the 90s with the Barcero crisis. So we're voting with our feet, right? The fact that we can't vote, we're voting with our feet. The fact that we have exoduses to show that we don't want this regime. But the interesting conflict for Cuban people is that Cuban people also don't want to leave their home countries. Culturally, we want to be on the island, but economically, politically, socially, the Cuban people are being starved. I mean, this is also a part of Soviet, plans, starving the people. And that is what the regime has been doing. And that is something that's not talked about. The political connotations to the economic problems are not being talked about. And that's the main problem.
Post-Castro brothers, so, it's sort of a new generation, people who, for the first time, people who weren't involved in the revolution back in 1959 now. So it is this sort of new generation. I think you find with things like, South Africa post-Mandela, the next generation does struggle, I think. And, the economy minister, Gil, had to resign, and a lot of ministers have been put under pressure because the Communist Party in Cuba is good at setting up scapegoats, but then the problems don't go away. So I think that's, but there's a degree of political instability that we haven't seen in Cuba for a long time when the Castros sort of, had it by an iron grip.